The relationship between European countries and the United States and Saudi Arabia have always had problems in the sense of public opinion in those countries were generally not that favorable for these relations, but governments nonetheless maintained very strong relationships, and it's in fact one of those areas of foreign policy where you can see quite a mismatch between, I suppose, what a lot of people want and what is actually happening, and therefore the Khashoggi killing, and in fact in the end the admittal by the Saudi government that yes, he was actually killed by Saudi government employees, has intensified that dynamic again, but it has not led to a breakdown in relations or in fact to a severe worsening of relations. It is true that particularly the United States, Britain and France are providing direct military assistance to the Saudi-led coalition that is largely fighting the Yemen war, and is also directly involved in monitoring, they say, targeting of particular sites and so on. And given that the war is now 4 years old, and that particularly in that targeting from the air, quite often really the wrong targets were hit, and frankly war crimes were committed. It would have made a lot of sense anyway, to revise this. And in fact, I think sensible governments should really look at this. Yemen should have been enough of a reason, and should have been much more of a reason, since many people died there. But international attention has quite a good way of looking away when it comes to non-democratic countries that are allied to, let's say, the United States or Europe. Saudi Arabia is just one of those cases. Now it's therefore, I think, quite a positive development that we have these parliaments acting on it, but whether it will actually lead to a change in the government's policy is another matter. So I think the Khashoggi killing did put a lot of pressure on governments, particularly the US and the UK and some other European governments, on saying, well, we need to do something about Saudi Arabia, right? So we cannot indict the crown prince directly. I mean, he's the crown prince of another country. In some ways, he can do what he wants. I mean, and that's what he's doing. But I think people started to feel quite bad about the Yemen war, and also about, well, the role of these Western countries in the war, and therefore the last few months we've seen intensified diplomacy to try to resolve the Yemen war, and partial arms export bans on Saudi Arabia, especially from Germany. But at the same time, we haven't really seen a solution to the Yemen crisis, because while negotiations have happened, on the ground fighting is continuing, and also airstrikes are continuing. So it seems that it's a bit more complicated than just putting pressure at the international level to solve such a very complicated war by now. So that on the ground you have parties that do not necessarily want an end, or do not agree necessarily with their international backers. In theory, the Saudis put forward a peace plan under Abdullah at the start of the 2000s, which is the so-called Saudi Peace Initiative. And that is officially still the position of the Saudi government, that they will only sign onto something that involves these points. And in fact, people usually say that this was quite a sensible plan. I mean, if you were going to have some kind of plan. But this plan is quite different from what apparently Jared Kushner and the Trump administration is currently trying to negotiate and trying to pressure the Palestinians and the Arab states to sign off. So this deal would be much worse, that the Trump administration is currently trying to implement. But therefore, I think it's very unlikely that it will be accepted by either Palestinians or the majority of Arab states. But this is one reason why the Trump administration wants to keep backing MBS, because they think that he probably has more of a willingness to go along with this plan. But this has not been publicly stated, and in fact, on the one occasion when the United States moved their embassy in Israel, there was initially rumors that Saudi Arabia might endorse it, but then quickly the same day actually a statement came from the king saying that no, we do not endorse this, and we stick to our old principles of this Saudi peace plan. Therefore, I think these things are all, being negotiated at the moment, and therefore in flux. But I would say I do not think that a kind of a lasting settlement can be made with anything less than, for example, was mentioned in this peace plan. Unlike other oil producers, which are slowly running out of oil, Saudi Arabia, needs to, in some ways, ensure that the oil price stays pretty low. So, in the sense that alternative technologies do not become, economically viable too early, and therefore, undermine the whole notion of using oil, and also to try and ensure that it can sell this oil to new partners if, for example, some countries try to move away from oil. And in this strategy, Asia has become very important. Saudi Arabia has for a while now exported most of its oil to Asia, particularly to China. But at the same time, Saudi Arabia needs a certain oil price to be quite high to break even, because it has enormous government expenditure, not least, for example, on the Yemen war and on massive PR campaigns and so on and so forth, and has been running a deficit for the last few years. So you see, there are two strategies which are not necessarily pointing in the same direction, and that's been one of the problems, I think, for the Saudis to manage, and therefore they needed to find new sources of revenue. So therefore they thought about selling some of their assets, selling some of the oil company, and recovering money from people they thought were corrupt, which is what they've done in the last few years. So, but these are all temporary measures. You can only do them once.